Hello children, in the last class we have studied about male reproductive system. In this class we are going to study about female reproductive system. As we have studied in male reproductive system, in the female reproductive system there is female sex organ. It is again divided into two, that is primary sex organ and secondary sex organ. As you have studied, in the primary sex organ of male is testis, here the primary sex organ of female is ovaries. Okay, and under secondary sex organ comes accessory duct, accessory gland and external genitalia. So the ovaries, why it is placed under primary sex organ? As we have already studied that ovaries produce that gametes and sex hormone, that is very essential for reproduction. That is why it is kept under primary sex organ. But here this secondary sex organ which helps in the process of reproduction. So that is why it is kept under secondary sex organ. So without the primary sex organ, fertilization or production of new offspring will not take place. So here students, let us start with the ovaries. This is the female reproductive system. Here this is the ovary. Ovary is placed in the lower abdominal region, that is in the pelvic region. So it is placed in the pelvic region. Okay, now these ovaries are fixed by, here this ovary is fixed by a double peritoneum fold. It is having a double peritoneum fold which fixes the ovary with that of the pelvic wall. That layer is known as mesovarium. So this mesovarium holds the ovary with the pelvic wall. Okay, there is one more ligament. Here you can see here this ovary is fixed with that of the uterus. Uterus is joined by the ovary with the help of a ligament which is called ovarian ligament. So this is the ovarian ligament. This is the ovarian ligament which supports the, which fixes the ovary with that of the uterus. Now there is one more ligament which is called the suspensory ligament. Actually it is present over here, that fixes the ovary with that of the lateral pelvic wall. So what you have seen, this ovary is fixed in the pelvic region by means of three supporting tissues. First is double fold of peritoneum, that is called mesovarium, and the second is the ovarian ligament that supports the ovary with that of the, which fixes the ovary with that of the uterus, and the lateral one is the suspensory ligament which supports the ovary with that of the lateral wall of the pelvic region. Now we will study in detail about this ovary. Ovary is a solid structure which is made up of a connective tissue that is surrounded. Suppose let me make the enlarged view of ovary. So this region is totally covered by a tissue called connective tissue. This is the ovary. It is filled by connective tissue which is known as the stroma. Okay, now this stroma is covered or lined by a cuboidal epithelium. Here you can see the cuboidal epithelium. I am not going to draw the entire region. So this is a cuboidal cells are present. That cell is known as germinal epithelium. epithelium. This is the germinal epithelium, and around this germinal epithelium there is one more layer of wall is present, that is known as peritoneum. Peritoneum. Okay, now this is the stroma, and this stroma is divided into two regions. Let me demarcate the area. Okay, this is said to be the ovarian medulla. The center portion is said to be the ovarian medulla, which is having blood capillaries. So you can see here blood capillaries. It is filled with blood capillaries, or you can say blood vessels. Now this is said to be the outer peripheral region of the cortex is said to be the peripheral region of this ovary is said to be the ovarian cortex. Okay, this is the ovarian cortex. This ovarian cortex, in this cortex you can able to see various stages of ovarian follicles. Ovarian follicles in various stages. Let us see one by one. What is the first stage? You see here, this is the first follicle, which is said to be the primary follicle. A primary follicle is having, this is the primary follicle, primary follicle. It is having primary oocyte, let us label here, primary oocyte, and this is the granulosa cell. This is the granulosa cell. So a primary follicle, this is the first stage. The primary follicle consists of primary oocyte and granulosa cell. So after that what happened? It develops into secondary follicle. So secondary follicle is having many layer of granulosa cells. This is primary oocyte here, this one is the primary oocyte, and you can see here many layer of granulosa cells is surrounding this primary oocyte, and there is one more layer which surrounds this granulosa cell, which is said to be the theca. This is the theca layer. Okay, now this stage is said to be the secondary follicle. This is the secondary follicle. Now what is the next stage? Next stage is the tertiary follicle. In the tertiary follicle, the oocyte is pushed towards one side, and granulosa cell is also pushed along with that, and there is a cavity formed. That cavity is filled with antrum. Let us see this. So this is the oocyte. This is the oocyte. Okay, and here so granulosa cells you can see here. A cavity is formed. This cavity is filled with a fluid called antrum. Now here you can see the granulosa cells, and now in this tertiary follicle, this is the tertiary follicle. Let us label here tertiary follicle. In this stage, that is in the tertiary follicle, primary oocyte completes its meiosis 1. That is meiosis 1. What do you mean by meiosis 1? You have studied meiosis is a reductional division. It is having two stages. The first meiosis 1 is completed over here in the tertiary follicle, So first meiosis is completed. As the primary oocytes completes its first meiotic division, it forms the secondary oocytes, and a polar body will label here this as a secondary oocyte. Okay, now the secondary oocyte is formed. Last follicle, that is the mature follicle, is known as the Graafian follicle. This Graafian follicle, so here this is the secondary oocyte, which is covered by a membrane. A membrane is covering over this secondary oocyte, that is known as pellucida, zona pellucida. Okay, and after that what happened? It forms the cavity like this, and Graafian follicle is formed. So here can see the granulosa cells. Granulosa cells are there. Okay, this is the mature Graafian follicle. This is the region where antrum is present. This is known as zona. Let us write here as zona pellucida. Zona pellucida. Antrum we are mentioning here. See, antrum is there. Okay. Secondary oocyte. This is the secondary oocyte. Okay. This one is the secondary oocyte. And zona pellucida covers the secondary oocyte. Antrum is there. This is said to be the Graafian follicle. Graafian follicle. So what are the follicle we have seen? The first is primary follicle, first one. Second is secondary follicle, this one secondary follicle. Third one is tertiary follicle, and the last one is the Graafian follicle. This is the mature follicle. Now when the follicle develops in the cortical region of the ovary, it secretes a hormone called estrogen. It secretes a hormone called estrogen. So what is the function of this estrogen hormone? This estrogen helps in the development of secondary sex organ in female, as well as it develops the endometrial tissues in the uterus. It develops the endometrial tissues. Okay. Now what happened to this Graafian follicles? This Graafian follicle rupture. Let us This is the Graafian follicle. Okay, Graafian follicle. Now, what happened to this Graafian follicle? Here the Graafian follicle rupture and secondary oocyte is released. This is the secondary oocyte, and this is the zona pellucida membrane which is over the secondary oocyte. So this is the secondary oocyte is released out of the Graafian follicles. This is the Graafian follicle. Okay. Now, what happened to this ruptured Graafian follicle? This ruptured Graafian follicle is now converted into another, which is said to be the corpus luteum. It forms a structure which is known as corpus luteum. This is known as corpus luteum. This corpus luteum is an yellow tissue. The color of this tissue is due to the presence of a pigment that is called lutein. That is called lutein. Lutein is secreted by this corpus luteum, and moreover it secretes a hormone which is called progesterone. Progesterone. So it is secreting progesterone. What is the function of this progesterone? Progesterone helps in the maintenance of endometrial tissues in the uterus. Why there is a need of maintenance of endometrial tissue? If fertilization takes place, implantation of the embryo takes place in the uterus. For that, they are maintaining the endometrial tissue. The endometrial tissue is maintained by the progesterone. And suppose if fertilization takes place and implantation takes place, at that time we call it as a pregnancy. In the later stages of pregnancy, this corpus luteum again releases what hormone called relaxin. Okay, so this is the function of the corpus luteum. And in the ovary you can see another white body. This white body is formed by the degeneration of the corpus luteum, which is called corpus albicans. Corpus albicans. Okay. Now this is about the ovary. Now what about the size of the ovary? The length of the ovary is about 2 to 4 centimeter, and the width is about 2 centimeter, and thickness is about 1 centimeter. So what we have seen, ovary is an almond shaped structure. Length is 2 to 4 centimeter, width is 2 centimeter, and thickness is 1 centimeter, and it is having two regions, that is the cortical region and the medulla. In the cortical region, different stages of ovarian follicles are formed, which produces estrogen hormone, and when the Graafian follicle rupture and it is converted into corpus luteum, which secrete another hormone called progesterone. Okay, so we have completed the structure of the ovary. Now next structure is fallopian tube. So this is the fallopian tube. This region is the fallopian tube. Now this fallopian tube is supported with a tissue which is called mesosalpinx. There is a mesosalpinx in this region which supports the fallopian tube. Fallopian tube is a muscular tissue. It is a muscular tissue. Muscular tube-like structure. It is muscular tube-like structure, and its length is about 10 to 12 centimeter. Okay. Now it is having different parts. This broad region is said to be the ampulla. This is the ampulla. Okay, that expands towards the lower region in the form of a funnel, which is called infundibulum. Infundibulum. Now at the margin of the infundibulum there is a finger-like projection which is called the fimbriae. Fimbriae. Okay, fimbriae is having cilia-like structure. Okay, now this fimbriae keeps on moving. It keeps on moves. Why it is moving? In order to collect the ovum or the secondary oocyte. That is, we usually used to call it as ovum. Actually it is a secondary oocyte which is released from the Graafian follicle. It picks up the secondary oocyte by this movable finger-like projection, that is called the fimbriae. This fimbriae, which is having cilia, small hair-like structure cilia, that beats the egg towards the funnel-shaped structure, that is the infundibulum. Okay, there is an opening, that is this region. Suppose this is a finger-like fimbriae. Okay, there is an opening before the funnel-like structure, that is called the ostium. Ostium. So here you can see the ostium. Okay. Now what happened this region? Here hair-like structure is there. It beats the egg towards the funnel shaped infundibulum, and then it transport towards the wider region, that is the ampulla. So ampulla, we can write here, fimbriae is a finger-like structure. Fimbriae is finger-like structure, and infundibulum it is funnel shaped structure, and ampulla it is wide, long, and the wall is thin. The wall of the ampulla is thin. Now, after that, you can see here, this is isthmus. There is another region which is called the isthmus. This is the isthmus. This region, isthmus, it is just opposite to ampulla. Ampulla is wide, this one is narrow. Ampulla is short, long, it is short, and the wall of the isthmus is thick. The wall of the isthmus is thick. Okay, now what happened? Here all you can see SHEELA. SHEELA is present in the fallopian tube. Why? Because egg do not have its own motile organ. So the movement of the egg is supported by the SHEELA. So SHEELA helps in the movement of the egg. So this is the junction. That is junction of ampulla and isthmus. We call it as ampullary isthmus junction. So where fertilization takes place. Where fertilization takes place. So this is the ampullary isthmus region where fertilization takes place. That means secondary oocyte reaches to this region and the sperm reaches to this region, and there only fertilization takes place. So these are the different parts of fallopian tube. What are they? Funnel shaped infundibulum. It is the margin is they are having a margin which is called the fimbriae, and after that a wider region ampulla, and then a narrow region isthmus. Okay. Now next we will study about the uterus. Students, this uterus is attached to the body cavity with the help of a double membrane peritoneal wall which is called mesometrium. Mesometrium. Okay. Now here this uterus is a large elastic structure which is placed in between the urinary bladder and the rectum. It is placed in between the urinary bladder and the rectum. It is in the shape of an inverted pear shape. Okay. The size of this uterus is, length is about 8 centimeter, width is 5 centimeter, and thickness is about 2 centimeter. Okay. Now we'll see the different parts of this uterus. This region is said to be the fundus. This is known as fundus. This is a dome-shaped structure. It is a dome-shaped structure. Here it receives the fallopian tube. See the fallopian tube? It receives the fallopian tube. This region is known as cornua. It is the corner of the uterus. Here the fallopian tube opens, and this is the body of the uterus. This is said to be the body of the uterus or corpus. It is otherwise known as corpus. Okay. Now we will see there are different walls of the uterus. The outermost layer, this is the outermost thick layer. Okay. So this layer is known as perimetrium. This layer is known as perimetrium. protects the uterus. It is a thick tissue which protects the uterus. Inner to this perimetrium, you can see here smooth connective tissue. Smooth connective tissue. Inner to this region is a smooth connective tissue. So that is called myometrium. That is the myometrium. That is the smooth connective tissue. What is the function of myometrium? It helps in the contraction of uterus during the expulsion of the fetus. Okay. Now, next is inner to this myometrium. Myometrium is a smooth connective tissue and a smooth tissue, and inner to this you can see glandular tissue. This is the glandular tissue which is known as endometrium. This is the glandular tissue. This is known as endometrium. This glandular tissue is made up of columnar epithelia. Some of the tissue is having cilia, some do not have cilia. Here, in this region only implantation of the embryo takes place. This endometrial tissue keeps on changing during, there is a cyclic change takes place during menstruation. Okay, so this is about the endometrium. Now, what happened? There is a line which demarcates the uterus with that of this region. This region, this narrow region is called isthmus. Isthmus. That means this region which demarcate, the line which demarcate the uterus, body of the uterus with this region is called the isthmus. Okay, and after that comes the cervix. Now, there is, if you see carefully, you can see an opening here. There is an opening over here. Okay, this opening is called, that is this region which communicate with the uterus, which is known as internal OS. This is isthmus and this is internal OS. OS means orifice. Orifice. Okay, it communicate with the uterus, and now this region external OS, OS means orifice, it communicate with the vagina. Okay, the region between internal OS and the external OS is called cervical canal. So we can hear this region. This region is said to be the cervical canal. The region between internal OS and external OS is known as the cervical canal. Okay, and after that the external OS opens into a muscular tissue which is known as the vagina. The length of the vagina is 7.5 centimeter. The length of the cervical canal is 2.5 centimeter. And the opening of this vagina is said to be, the opening is said to be the vaginal canal or vulva. And this is the region where sperm is deposited and fetus is expelled out. So here we have completed the female reproductive structure, that is ovary, fallopian tube, uterus, cervix and vagina. Now we will study the external genitalia. So this is external genitalia. External genitalia consists of Menus pubis, which is a cushion of fatty tissues, and after that labia major. This labia major is a fleshy fold of tissue which extends down from Menus pubis and surrounds the vaginal opening, that is the vulva. And inner to that is the labia minor. It is a pair of fold of tissue under the labia major. Hymen, it is a membrane which partially covers the opening of vagina. This is usually seen in virgins. Next is clitoris. It is a tiny finger-like structure which lie at the upper junction of the two labia minora above the urethral opening. Okay, so this is about the external genitalia. Now we'll see the mammary gland. Mammary gland, each mammary gland is having glandular tissue and variable amount of fat. The glandular tissue of each mammary gland is divided into 15 to 20 mammary lobes containing cluster of alveoli. Now you can see there mammary lobes are there. Okay, it is labeled as mammary lobe, and each gland is having 15 to 20 mammary lobe. Inside this mammary lobe there is a cluster of alveoli, mammary alveoli are present. So inside this mammary alveoli, actually that is milk is secreted. Cells are having very thin cells surrounds the alveoli. From that region milk is secreted and it is stored in the cavity of the alveoli, and from there this milk is secreted and it is transferred through the mammary tubule. Mammary tubule of each lobe join to form mammary duct. Several mammary ducts joins to form a wider mammary ampulla, and which is connected to lactiferous duct through which milk is sucked out. We'll have a quick recap. Female reproductive system, as we have studied, it is made up of female sex organ. Female sex organ, basically it is divided into primary sex organ and secondary sex organ. Primary sex organ is the ovary. Ovary is having a wall called peritoneum, and inner to this peritoneum is a cuboidal like cells which is known as the germinal epithelium. And ovary is made up of connective tissue called stroma, which is divided into two, ovarian medulla and ovarian cortex. Ovarian medulla is having blood vessels and ovarian cortex is having different ovarian follicular developmental follicles you can see in the ovarian cortex. Now the secondary sex organs are fallopian tube. The different parts of fallopian tubes are funnel shaped infundibulum, wider ampulla and a narrow isthmus. Next is uterus. Uterus is having different parts, that is fundus which is dome shaped. Cornua. Cornua is the corner of the uterus. Just below that uterus comes the body or corpus where the implantation takes place. Now next part is the cervix, that the body of the uterus extend towards the cervix. Cervix is having two openings, that is internal OS and external OS. The region between internal OS and external OS is called the cervical canal that opens into the vagina. So this is about the female reproductive system. Dear children, we have completed female reproductive system and male reproductive system. Go through the portion thoroughly. In the next class we will be studying about gametogenesis, that is formation of gametes. Okay, thank you.